perhaps the most qualified man a president has ever appointed to be ambassador to Israel. Mike Huckabee is on the line with us. Ambassador, first of all, thank you so much for your hospitality when I was in Israel a few weeks ago, and really appreciate you taking time. I know it's a busy time for you joining us on the show today. Welcome to Salem Radio.
Scott, it's such a pleasure to be with you. It was an absolute delight to finally meet you. I've been one of your biggest fans. You absolutely crush it every time you're on CNN, and you're the lone voice of common sense and reason and a table full of people that have lost their minds. And so when you were in Israel, I told my staff, I said, I really want to meet SCOTT Jennings. And I just enjoyed getting to visit with you. And I'm glad you were here in person because you got to see firsthand what's really going on, not what some people in the media say. And I hope you'll come back often. And I look forward to seeing you when you do.
Well, I want to talk about, thank you for saying all those nice things. And I want to talk to you about what you just mentioned, which is the truth on the ground versus what's being reported here in Western media. Before we do, though, it appears we have breaking news. The White House press secretary is announcing that presidential emissary Steve Witkoff, and you are going to go into Gaza tomorrow and inspect food distribution sites, and that you all may have some announcements about a new plan for aid distribution. What can you tell us about your planned visit to Gaza tomorrow?
Well, the president wants us to go see firsthand and report back to him directly, which is what we're going to do. I think there's been so much misinformation, and for people like me who live here full time, who have a pretty good understanding of what's going on, and certainly see a very different picture of what's taking place in Gaza than most people who are reporting on it from the New York Times or other entities. But the president wants us to go, be able to talk to people who are getting food, visit some of the distribution sites, go to areas where we're told that people are starving and see firsthand what's really going on. And that's what we're going to be doing. And be honest with you, Scott, I was a little surprised that they announced it because I thought, well, we're probably going in there kind of on the down low. And then when Caroline Leavitt announced it from the White House podium, I said, I guess it's out of the bag. We're going to be there. So, I feel very grateful to the president, whose leadership in this entire process has been absolutely stellar. And if people aren't keeping up with his statements, they really need to see the kind of clarity that he has had. He has repeatedly said Hamas has no future in Gaza. They're not going to be there to rule it. Anyone who thinks they should or they could even be there, it's like saying the Nazis could have had a role after World War II in Germany and maybe helped lead the place. And I'm just grateful we've got a president that has never wavered. He's never been wishy-washy about what he has said. And his statement today, which I thought was absolutely stellar, he said the fastest way to end the humanitarian crises in Gaza is for Hamas to surrender and release the hostages. It's about time somebody said that, because you got all these people from Europe who are blaming Israel for the suffering in Gaza rather than blaming Hamas, the savages.
Yeah, it is interesting that the president has maintained absolute moral clarity here, even as you have all these people in Western media and in our, supposed allies out here saying they're going to recognize a Palestinian state. I don't even know what that means as we sit here today with Hamas still in charge of Gaza. I mean, effectively, they're rewarding Hamas's propaganda campaign, and they're rewarding Hamas for holding on to these hostages all this time. You're going to go look at aid distribution sites. I think a lot of people want to know, what are the prospects for getting these 50 hostages back? I mean, it's been 660-something days now, I think. They've been there a long time. Some are alive, some are dead. What's your view? Do we have a chance of bringing these people home?
Only if we make it real clear who we believe the bad guys are. That's why President Trump's statement today was so very important, because it cut through the noise that you've heard from President Macron of France, or Sturmer of the UK, or the Irish, or the Netherlands, and all these countries whose leaders are talking about what Israel ought to do. Here's an interesting truth, Scott. Not any of those countries that are whining about it have lifted a finger or have sent a box of food to Gaza. But they've got it all figured out of what Israel ought to be doing. And Israel was the nation that got attacked. They were the ones who were the victims of the war. And it's their people who are still being held hostage in Gaza in these god-awful tunnels that people forget. The tunnel system under Gaza is larger than the London Underground. All these years, the billions and billions of dollars that have been sent into Gaza to build an economy and help these people out of poverty, and Hamas has pocketed most of the money, and they built tunnels for one purpose, and that's to murder Jews in cold blood when they had the chance. And when they had the chance, they took the chance, and they did something that was so evil that it defies any sense of civilized people acting. It just has been stunning to see.
Let's debunk a couple of things that are being said over here in the West and in the United States media ecosystem. First of all, the attack often comes that the United States and Israel have done nothing or just simply have done very little or not enough to feed the people in Gaza. Can you set the record straight about what the U.S. and the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation and the nation of Israel are doing to alleviate suffering?
The Gaza Humanitarian Foundation was set up at the order of President Trump. We created it for the sole purpose of getting food to hungry people, but in a way that Hamas couldn't steal it. Over 100 million meals have been served through the GHF, and they've been done safely. I'm not going to tell you it's always and every day it's been perfect, because, you know, when you have a lot of hungry people coming to get food, at times it can get messy. But there were times they were reporting that 27 people had been shot at the feeding site. It was not true. Not one person had been even injured, much less killed. And yet the Washington Post, the New York Times, CNN, and other entities ran with the story without checking it out. They took the word of Hamas for that. The other thing that has been so very just utterly false, they'll take a picture. The New York Times the other day had a picture of an emaciated child and said, this is a child who's starving to death from malnutrition in Gaza because of Israel. Well, it turns out that the kid had a birth defect. He wasn't starving. He was sick, and he's been sick since birth. The other side of the story they forgot to tell you was that Israel actually transported that child to a hospital in Jordan so he could get medical help. Not only were they not starving him, they were getting him to a world-class health center where he could get help. There was another case, a picture that got widely distributed of a starving child. Turns out the picture was from 2017, and it wasn't even in Gaza. And then there was a picture where a child looked hungry, but his mother was right beside him. And Scott, anybody with just a couple of eyes and IQ above broccoli could see in the picture that the mother was quite well fed. And so you don't have to be the Detective Columbo to look and say, if the kid's starving, is it because mom ate all his food? I don't mean to be crass, but that's the kind of misinformation and outright disinformation that we're having to deal with every single day.
It seems to me, Ambassador, that we are in the midst of a highly coordinated propaganda campaign. You have Hamas, you have other countries that are now involved, you have Western media involved, you have Democratic political actors in the United States who are saying absolutely verifiably false things in their official capacities as congresspeople and senators. What is going on? It seems like all of a sudden a massive amount of coordination is going on to disseminate this propaganda. Why is it happening at this moment?
It's a combination, one, of anti-Semitism. There is a real hatred toward the Jewish people and toward Israel. I believe it's a spiritual problem. I know a lot of people think it's geopolitical. I don't believe that. I think that if you're really angry at God and you worship the creation instead of the creator, if you believe that climate change is the greatest real danger facing humanity and not the evil of selfishness and murder and mutilating children, if you bought into the idea that those are good things and that worship of God is a bad thing, it would be natural that you would probably direct a lot of your animosity and hatred toward the people that have been representing God for 3,800 years on this planet, who believe that there is one God with one great truth, the God of the Jewish faith. And that's also the faith upon which every Christian builds his or her faith. It's that. There's certain levels of jealousy. The Israelis have built an extraordinary economy and life and world in a tiny little sliver of land. You were here not long ago. And it's an amazing country that is doing things, punching well above its weight in technology and innovation. And there's some of that. And then there's just this historic blood libel that let's blame the Jews for everything. And one of the, I guess, missions that I feel I have is to be able to stand and let people know that the story needs to be told correctly and honestly. And most of what they have heard about Israel specifically and the Jews in general, it's just simply not true.
Ambassador Huckabee, we have about 30 seconds for this final answer before we go to break, and then you're going to stick with us. But just to debunk one more thing, it has been said over and over again that there's no evidence that Hamas is looting the aid that goes into Gaza. The United Nations just today has published data showing that 90% of the trucks from May to July were in fact looted, often by armed mobs. Just for the record, is Hamas looting the aid that goes into Gaza, and are they doing it in a violent fashion?
They absolutely are, Scott. And when we set up the GHF fund, one of the things people told us when they got their food was, wow, this is the first time we didn't have to pay for the food. Hamas not only stole it, they turned around and sold it to the people who are hungry at prices that were ridiculous so that they could pay their soldiers, buy more weapons, and murder more people. That's the fact.
I was hoping you might opine a bit for us about a longer-term future here, because you have countries now saying they want to recognize a Palestinian state. You still have people raising the idea of a two-state solution. It seems to me, Ambassador, there can be no two-state solution as long as there's any Hamas left or there's any Hamas government at all. Is that your view? What is the posture of the United States about this phrase, Palestinian state or two-state solution?
Well, it's really been amazing that in the midst of Israel trying to get hostages released, and in the midst of a war that they're trying to fight, and the fact that they are working hard to get humanitarian aid and food into hungry people, that you have all these European nations who, by the way, have not lifted one finger or given one box of food to the hungry people of Gaza. They've been complaining about what others didn't do, but they haven't done anything. And they're out calling for the establishment of a Palestinian state. Well, they had one. It was called Gaza. That was a purely Palestinian state. How did that work out? I'm outraged by these European nations and what they've said and the way they've done it. And here's what the effect of it was. The effect of it was to rally Hamas. It gave them a new lease on life and made them feel like that they really had a future because they had the Europeans behind them instead of Israel. And I would like to say to every person, whether they're in the U.S. or France or the UK or Canada, wherever they are, if you spend your time blaming Israel for being attacked and having 1,200 of their civilians murdered, having their women raped in front of their children on purpose, having elderly people burned to death in their wheelchairs in front of their families, if you take the side of that versus the side of Israel in this conflict, then you're a really, really sick human being. And I just don't understand how people can go out and chant from the river to the sea. But what I do know is that Hamas loved all of these comments by Emmanuel Macron and Sturmer in the UK and the other European leaders who have really made fools of themselves.
Well, I assume in your conversations with your diplomatic counterparts from those nations, they must admit to you that it's domestic politics, is it not? I mean, many of these countries have been overrun by pro-Hamas populations because of the mass migration crisis. These world leaders who are giving in to these demands from Hamas, who are giving aid and comfort to Hamas at this critical time, all for domestic politics reasons, it's rather sickening when you consider that it's Israel that was attacked on October the 7th, when it's Israel and Jewish people who were raped and murdered and still being held hostage in Gaza. It is amazing to me they put their own personal domestic political situation ahead of what's moral and right in the region, Ambassador.
You've nailed it exactly, and it is disgusting. I think it's even more disgusting that there are people in the United States who get their news from Al Jazeera. They take the word of the New York Times, who even will say, we can't verify this, but they don't say it until the last paragraph of the story. And then when they do issue a retraction, like they did yesterday, when it turned out the story of the little boy that was supposedly hungry turned out to have a serious disease from birth. When you have those kind of things, it does affect even Republicans in America, some of whom have said, oh, man, Israel they need to do different things. And yet what they may not know is what the real facts are. So one of the reasons that Steve Witkoff and I will be there is to report back immediately when we return to the president. And it's going to be, I think, a very important thing. But I cannot tell you how proud I am to serve a president whose moral clarity on this is absolutely just sterling. He said today the fastest way to end the humanitarian crises in Gaza is for Hamas to surrender and release the hostages. That's the kind of moral clarity that we ought to be hearing from every world leader who believes in freedom. President Trump has been consistent, but if you listen to some of these other people, it looks like they lick their finger, put it in the wind, and see which way it's blowing.
Ladies and gentlemen, that is Ambassador Mike Huckabee. He's the U.S. ambassador to Israel. And in breaking news, he has confirmed that he and Steve Witkoff will be going into Gaza tomorrow to inspect the food distribution situation. Thank you so much, Ambassador, for joining us.